Folks, this is Drew Burdick with the Building Great Experiences podcast. With me, I have Conor. I'll let him introduce himself in a second, but Conor and I got connected by a mutual friend, both passionate about human-centered design and customer experience, both kind of in the same world. So looking forward to talking to Conor today and sharing some thoughts on how we make great experiences.
Thanks, Drew. It's great to be here. I appreciate you reaching out, and everything you're doing with this podcast is pretty awesome. So excited to continue to talk on the shared passionate experience. A little bit about me. So my name is Conor McFerran. I run a human-centered design and problem-solving firm called Lift Collective out of Chicago. And basically, we're a typical human-centered design firm. We help people solve problems from that human-centered perspective by bringing all of your people together. So it's not just your customers and consumers, but also your fellow collaborators, so people like us, those people outside the organization, and your colleagues inside, because a lot of the times we find that you're actually sitting on a lot of the information that you need to know to make progress. You're not communicating. So helping to facilitate those connections internally and externally so that you can focus on what matters, right? Your priorities, what your strategies are, how you're going to move forward, what your next steps are, the people in the organization, how you all are working together, what your EX and your HR processes look like so that people are maximizing their engagement, the processes of how you're going about solving those problems, and then the actual projects that you're doing to deliver on all of those steps prior to that. So helping people kind of start with that project nugget and then boil back up to the larger, more systemic issues that are probably contributing in a major way to the success or lack thereof of that particular project.
Awesome. Well, excited to have you on the show. We'll kick things off with a topic that Conor and I were discussing when we first met, which is this notion of how do you drive successful product adoption, and what are the key factors that do that?
Yeah, I think based on what we had talked about and kind of how we approach all of this, obviously you've got to have technical capabilities. You got to be able to make the thing. You have to have business context. It's got to be viable. But I think the piece that we often overlook or make assumptions on is that user desirability piece. And so we kind of rush into solutioning and we rush into trying to get something to market without actually slowing down to say, what do people actually need? And then how might we bring the capabilities that we have to bear, either technically or from a business perspective, to make that a reality and to make that a sustainable solution. And so we get caught up in things like founder bias or walking through making sure we're ticking all the boxes in the processes and tools and steps that we're doing outside of actually understanding why we're doing any of this. And so when we think about how do you get that product to really take off, you've got to have that pull, that consumer and customer pull. And the only way you can really establish that is by going out and finding out what they want and what they need and how they're dealing with these situations currently, so that you can find out where those opportunities are and then bring your genius to apply on the other side to make them off.
You mentioned the pull. I've seen this so many times that many organizations, when they have a product, try to push it on their customers or push it on people, right? They say, hey, we have this great, wonderful thing. You've got to do it. And we're going to, it's almost like taking a stick and kind of like pushing people through. And instead of creating this gravitational pull that, attracts people to your product, gets them to use it, gets them to experiment, try it out. I think like some of the things I've seen work well with creating that pull is bringing people along in the process, right? So not just doing it to them, but doing it with them, right? I think, especially when we think about customers, some of the most, I think, valuable insights come when you incorporate customers into the creation of the thing, right? Like bring them into the process, let them give feedback, experiment, iterate quickly, and people become tremendous champions of the product itself because they felt like they helped co-create it. Similarly, if you're doing something internal, like an employee-facing experience, those employees should be part of deciding like what the thing is versus sort of, coming down from the mountain and handing them this is what you're going to get. And they're like, well, I don't want this. This isn't helpful for me. You didn't take into consideration these outlier, things. So I think it's a pull part of it is it's hard, but it's extremely important. It's a really intentional effort you got to make to incorporate people into that process so that they don't have an allergic reaction or an organ rejection, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's really not that difficult. I think we make it more complex or onerous than it really needs to be, because it's easy for us to fall back into the things that we know how to do, the stuff we know how to make and the ways we know how to make it and the money we got to make to satisfy shareholders. But if we slow down and we actually ask those individuals for whom we're making this solution, what they need and how they need it, and observe and understand and empathize and really get into their lives, it streamlines everything that comes after that. Because now you're not wasting time pushing product out there. You're not wasting time checking boxes. You're not wasting time trying to figure out P&Ls for a product that's never going to get off the drawing board because nobody's out there actually buying. So that's one advantage. The second advantage is that by engaging those people in that process, now you're starting to create ambassadors and people that are actively talking this up and utilizing it and showing it off to their friends and doing all of the things that we know that it takes to launch a successful product, but they're doing it voluntarily because they believe in it. And now you're able to leverage some of that inertia, which then relieves some pressure on your marketing department, because marketing is all about the push, right? Like, you want this is what you want. Flip that lens, and now you've got the pull, and marketing's like, yeah, here you go. Now we're all working together, which kind of gets back a little bit to what I said at the top, as far as getting everybody in the organization to collaborate from the get-go. I think too often when we talk about the things that block a successful launch is that we're not involving all of the right people at the right time. And we stagger people in too late in the process. Whereas if we are able to start by bringing everybody to that kickoff meeting or that initial table, or even earlier on defining what that opportunity space might be and how we're going to attack it, we'll find that we're sitting on 90% of what we need to know. It's just been siloed and it's been caught up in the various corners of the organization. But by creating that space for people to come together, to exchange ideas, to communicate, we find that we've got a lot of really great material, and then we just have to complement it with what the consumers and the users really want. And so it doesn't become, the user research part of this doesn't become this onerous, massive, huge, weightful project. It's more of a check-in. It's more of a smaller scale thing that is then repeatable, easy to coordinate, costs a lot less, is a constant IV drip of that connection with the consumer, so that we're not making these assumptions, we're not pushing things out that people don't want.
I love the metaphor, IV drip. I've not heard that. I'm gonna steal that. So it's a great transition to the next question, which is, why do many products miss the mark on desirability? And what are some things that leaders out there who are trying to deliver a great product experience can do to avoid that?
I think we've already started to touch on that, and it's by not asking people what they need, and not just asking, but truly empathizing, getting out there and observing, and removing yourself and your biases from the experience. So immersing yourself in their experience, really letting yourself kind of be in the context, understand what they're up against, understand what they're doing to try and remedy the situation, and then bringing all that back and synthesizing it with what you already know to create these compelling, magnetized whole experiences that people are going to want. I think the other part of that too is kind of what we've already said, is we think it has to be this massive experience, this massive project to go out and do statistically significant research across the entire world to understand what we need to make and what people really want. And in reality, it's kind of a yes and, right? Like, you have to set a foundation of sorts, but it's not all through one channel. It's not all statistical research. It's not all deep ethnography. It's the combination of things. It's the combination of what the tech team understands, what the R&D team understands, what marketing understands, what the C-suite understands. Bringing all of that together to say, where are the gaps? What do we need to understand to make this narrative complete? And then going out and filling that gap in the incremental ways, so that we're kind of constantly up to speed on what our people want and what our people are struggling with and what they need.
I think a big one for me is like testing assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
The idea, you're not your customer, or you're not your user. I think a lot of times stakeholders kind of they're like, oh, this is what I've been in this business for however many years, and I know Yeah, even honestly, even when you are the user, you still need to check your assumptions and make sure that you're not off base. Probably 5 or 6 years ago, I was doing work with a company, commercial real estate, and they basically wanted to implement a CRM to enable their brokers to share data more effectively, because these brokers were going out, they're shaking hands and having dinners and lunches and stuff, and they were getting these valuable insights that they wanted to be able to collect and make it easier to pass along. And it was really interesting because the assumption was, oh well, let's just implement this thing, and it's going to solve all our problems. Well, they didn't have a CRM culture, right? And CRM that they were looking at was Salesforce, and the brokers were like, well, we're not salespeople. Like, we're not using Salesforce. That's not who we are. So it was really fascinating because, although a lot of the sort of capabilities that they said that they wanted, right, the brokers themselves, they didn't actually want what they thought that they wanted. And the really senior most stakeholders that were involved, they said, oh yeah, well, I think this would help us. And then we really, started to test it with them themselves. They were like, actually, I don't think I want a CRM. So we ended up building them a custom solution that was bespoke to their needs based on the interviews and the research and the analysis that we were doing. It wasn't like a one-for-one CRM. It was kind of like a CRM light, if you will, and it was included other differentiated capabilities that was bespoke to their business and how they did things. But it was really fascinating. It was just it was a perfect example of how a lot of these folks, they thought they know what they wanted. And then when they tried it, they were like, I'm never going to use this, right? They were kind of like, I'm never going to put this thing in an app. And you're like, well, okay, you're saying that you want this, but it's not actually solving the thing that you think it is. Yeah, I think desirability is kind of a fickle concept, right? And it has more to do with the unspoken, unseen sort of things are than it is about like what people even say that they want. And so you have to be willing to kind of pull back the onion a little bit and ask for questions, look for the things that aren't being spoken about, and that'll typically lead you to what is desirable, what do people really need and want.
Absolutely. I think, I couldn't have said it better, but it's that idea that those are assumptions too. The consumer or the customer that you're observing, they're making assumptions about what they think they want because they're only reacting to what's out there and what they know. So you describe the situation where they need some sort of customer management solution and they think a CRM solution. And then when you get it in front of them, it's like, no, this isn't at all right. And so that's where, to your point, it's not just about listening. It's not just about observing. It's not just about talking amongst yourselves as you are reacting as the observers to what you've seen. It's all three of them. And it's triangulating that understanding of that full person, that full engagement, and then looking at that across a range of people to say, what's consistent? What are our outliers that we might build on that are going to spark some additional features potentially down the line or a new business spike off of the original plan? But doing it in that holistic manner so that we're not zeroing in on our assumptions or their assumptions, but rather pulling them apart to find out what that real nugget actually is that then we can build on.
I think so. You said something to me a few weeks ago that I wanted to like pull back up, and this idea that a lot of organizations get sort of like trapped in MVP mindset where it's, minimum viable product. We're going to deliver this thing to market, and you use the acronym SLC, simple, lovable, complete. And I'd love for you to elaborate on what that is and how you think about that, and how can organizations use an SLC versus an MVP.
I think the SLC is really, another way to put it is minimum desirable product. It's kind of the same mindset. It's flipping it from the viability lens as the driver to the desirability lens, and counterbalance, kind of flipping everything on its head to say, what do we need to make based on what people need, and what is that simplest engagement that will resonate with people, and again, trying to figure out what that pull is and what that right pull is in an incremental way that doesn't waste a whole lot of time. So when we think about the simple, lovable, complete, it's really focusing on what is that one single thing that is in need that we can put together and have it be done, versus an MVP where there's a lot of coming soon signs throughout the experience, right? When you start to engage with that, you're setting expectations on the user to say, this sounds awesome. I would love to, or it's not ready. Oh, this is awesome. And so now we're starting, instead of capitalizing on that enthusiasm, now we're starting to build in disappointment. And you get enough disappointment, you start eroding trust. And for us, it's expensive. It's expensive to build, and it's expensive to maintain, and it's really expensive to rebuild or repair. And so as a way to offset those exponential costs of eroding trust, Start simple, manage expectations. It gives people what they want. It may not do everything they ever want, but it'll do that one thing that they really needed to do well. And it gives you a really great starting point to then expand upon and build off of from a known point of success so that everything isn't a guess afterward, right? When we try to do too many things, how do we know what's working? Too many variables. Simplify it down. Just do the one thing that you know is going to resonate. Get that nailed. Build that trust. Build that pull that we keep talking about. And then figure out how to expand it over time based on your understanding of the needs, goals, desires, trajectory of that server.
Said it really well when we spoke last, this directional, not perfectional too.
Yeah.
Which I think is really a great way to think about it. Like, how do you get directional, focus and accuracy, and then be incremental and iterative from there? To your point, like, trust is expensive. And so make sure that directionally you're going to drive trust, but you're not trying to perfect the thing. And you don't need to do all the things, but just do like one thing exceptionally well so that when someone uses your product, they're not leaving with kind of like a bad taste in their mouth, like, that was kind of crappy. And then they're probably never going to come back, right? I mean, or it's highly unlikely they're going to come back and use your thing again. You really have that one moment to make an impact and, really then to say, whoa, that was amazing. I'm going to come back and use this tomorrow, or keep using this thing because it actually helps add value to my life versus, it's okay. Like this is actually kind of crappy. I don't want to use this, right?
Yeah. And in that context, now you've got them bursty with enthusiasm about what are you guys going to do next? Like, this first thing you put out was so kick ass. I can't wait to see what you're going to do next. And now I'm dialed in. I'm paying attention. I'm connecting with you, which now you've also got that opportunity to re-engage with them. So when we talk about that IV drip of engagement and understanding, these are the people that you want to get their input on, right? I think going back to the directional, not perfectional, we use that a lot in our engagements just to kind of level set everybody. And to your point, like, it doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes it's the corollary to directional, not perfectional, is this concept of right fi, right? You got high fi, like, everything's locked in, the video is made, it's pixel perfect. You got lo-fi, back of the napkin, app sheet. Whatever the right level of communication to get the idea across, whether it's to your colleagues, to your executives, to your consumers, that's the right level. And so we don't need to expend all these additional resources and time trying to make it pixel perfect if that's not going to be what's going to keep us moving and making the right decisions in service of that improved experience for the consumer.
I think before we transition to the next topic, one of the things that I see a lot of design folks do, or folks who are kind of in our universe, is they get super dogmatic about process. Like, we have to do this, and we have to do this much research, and then we need to go do wireframes, and then we need to do the fidelity, low fidelity, prototype, then we got to go high fidelity. And you're like, you're missing the point, man. Like, the process is not sacred, right? Like, yes, there are sort of tried and true methods and, things that you can leverage. However, think of it as like tools in your tool belt, and use the right tool for the right job, the right time. Right? To your point, like, if what is required to get stakeholders aligned is sketch on a piece of paper, then do that. Or if it's like they're not, they don't want to see the sausage being made and they actually want to see the high fidelity thing, and maybe you're moving into something that's more higher fidelity, right? And I think it's sometimes seen teams that get really tripped up on, but the process says that we have to do it this way, and you're like, who says you got to do it that way? I mean, like, yeah, you were trained to do it that way, and maybe that, like, it works in certain situations, but not every situation. You have to be really, it's like, don't turn off your brain, like, you still have to be thinking in critical, use critical thinking to assess, like, what do I really need to show somebody, help them understand. And I'm a big believer, I say this a lot, like, show not tell, like, trend towards, like, don't talk about what you're going to do, don't talk about what you mean, like, show people. So even if it's like real time, you're pulling up Miro board or FigJam or a Word document or a Notion document, and you're just like putting things in front of the person to be like, this is what I'm actually saying, not trying to articulate it when people don't understand the jargon you're using, right? Or they don't understand, like, they're trying to visually understand, and they're like, I don't know what you're saying. So anyway, I think it's like a little side note, but I do think a lot of times people get stuck on, hey, the process has to be completed before we can call it done. I'm like, not really. Turn your brain off.
No, and I think to build on that, processes are just frameworks. And what's the old adage about frameworks? All frameworks are wrong, some are useful, right? So
Yeah.
the process it's a thing to remind you of the things that you should check on. And if they don't need done at that point, then don't waste your time doing it. But also just double check that, hey, do I really need to do this step? Would it be helpful right now? What is the problem I'm trying to solve? Will this tool, will this framework, will this process, will this, you mentioned 5 tools just in your discussion about how to express it. Will any of these help me do that better in service of getting to that right fidelity offering that is going to create the pull? That's it. Everything else, if we're getting tripped up in checking the boxes, then we're missing the point.
One more thing on that piece too. Like, I think prototypes, people think that they have to happen in certain places in certain ways. The prototype can literally be anything. It's like whatever you need to convey the concept. Right? And so, I mean, I've done prototyping that's like not at all what you would expect a prototype to be. I'm literally boxes and bubble wrap, like keeping stuff together and doodling on it with a marker and being like, this is what I'm actually talking about. Like, this is the interface. And then they tap on this thing on this kiosk, and then it goes here. And then, like, you don't have to make it what people typically think of a prototype as. Anyways,
the assumption at the end. We assume that a prototype means X, Y, Z. Does it have to? What's the end goal? To get people to understand what we're doing and how we might make it better. How do we do that? What's the best way to do it?
Yeah. So I've talked a lot about, how do you define what an SLC is and the difference between MVP. We've talked a lot about how do we help products, especially out the gate, be desirable. And I think what would be good to chat through next is like looking looking forward into the future and saying, how do we anticipate needs and, determining things that we can do now to prepare the way for that, future. Obviously, as we talked about, like assumptions, you have to check your assumptions and test your assumptions. But same breath, there's a need to be thinking about what's on horizon 2 or 3. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, kind of getting ahead of the game or ahead of the ball versus reacting to it down the road.
I think this, and it's going to sound tired, everything comes back to that user desirability and that understanding, right? And so when we talked earlier about setting that baseline of what your consumers' needs are, and kind of really empathizing and understanding and coming up with those personas and the user journeys and the kind of the stock summary of who we're engaging with is essential. And then it's a matter of checking in with that periodically because everything's always in flux, right? The entire world is always conflict, is always people's expectations are changing as other products and services and offerings are coming in and giving them new possibilities and new things to expect. So we need to be both proactive and reactive to that because we're going to be putting things out there that they're going to be reacting to that are going to change their experience. But we also need to kind of anticipate where they're going to go or where they might go and how we might get them there. So starting with that deep understanding of what are they really after? And it's a level deeper than jobs to be done. Jobs to be done is great. It's a little more at that tactical level. If we go up higher order to that emotional level, what are the goals that you're trying to achieve? And what are you really after in life so that we can meet you where you are in the channel that makes sense for us to do it, right? And so one of the great examples we always go back to is Simon Sinek's golden circle, the why, how, what, right? They don't buy what you're making or buy why you do it. To activate that, think about like cracking it open like an egg, right? And I'm a big fan of the half sheet and the analog digital experience here. But if you think about taking that why, how, what and cracking it open over a timeline, right? Now you've got why is your guiding art. What do people really want? How we're going to execute it and what we're going to make over time, they're going to change based on the context that's constantly evolving. But if we have a clear understanding about what's driving people and how we need to show up in order to complement that, now we know where we're going into infinity. And so if we're able to do that and we do that well, it saves us a whole lot of time. It gives us a whole lot of clarity. It helps us tear off what doesn't matter and focus our efforts, which makes us a lot more efficient. So when we think about our 4 lenses, right? your business viability lens goes way up because you're not chasing things that aren't going to resonate. It also puts you in a position where you've got, to your point, your horizons or your platforms or your whatever your metaphor is that's going to carry you forward from today to the future. And it also helps you track back to say, this is our ultimate goal within the constraints or possibilities of today's technology. How do we work back to today to figure out how to stack those things up so that we can reach that end goal that's that ultimate consumer desirability? Once you have that, it's so much easier to anticipate because you're not having to rethink it every time. B, when we talk about this IB drip, once we have that foundation, that's where the IB drip comes in, right? And so we reconnect with these consumers periodically and say, does our model still hold? Do our assumptions about these personas or this user journey, is it still accurate? And if it's not, we tweak it, we modify it. Because again, it's the framework. It's going to be as useful as it is in the context that it was created. And then the context changes and you have to evolve the framework. But I think the key to all of this is setting that first understanding by which you have a point of reference, and then making sure that you're constantly kind of watering the garden to figure out what's changing, what's growing, what's withering, what do we need to let go so that we can focus on our use, so that we can have this cohesive, coherent collection of things that deliver on consumer need, that make sense to consumers, and that are within our wheelhouse of ability to create profitably.
I'm going to add to a few things you said because this is really good. Something else that I think often doesn't get discussed in human-centered design is strategy, like competitive advantage, leverage, symmetry, those kinds of things. And I think that one of the opportunities as you think about the future, I love your little quick illustration of why, how, what. I think that's dead on. I think that if an organization has a group of people that understand what their competitive advantage is, what their strategy is, basically that why, like why do we exist as a company? What is it that makes us different? You know, have people who are all kind of marching to that same North Star and have that same mindset. And the tactical stuff becomes a lot easier because you have a culture where people know why exist, why your brand is a thing, what makes you differentiated compared to other organizations. And then it'll influence and affect like where the product goes over time. And it's not like, I like to think of it as you need to have a compass, a strong compass, not a map. A lot of people get really hyper fixated on like roadmaps and like, you got to, plan everything out. It's like, no one knows the future. Like, who knew that a global pandemic was going to happen in 2020, right? That was going to like change and disrupt the entire landscape for everyone, and then have cascading effects where it's this whole work from home and then return to office. And now AI has come in and like, apart from the top percent of, people who are involved in OpenAI, like nobody knew GPT was going to launch in November 2022, right? And it completely disrupted everything. And now everyone's trying to figure out and scrambling to like incorporate AI into their stuff. So it's like, you don't know the future. There's no way, I don't care who you are, what you do, like there's no way you can predict the future. You might have some insight that gives you, a better ability to forecast and predict things that may come. You just don't know. And so what's most important versus having a plan or a roadmap is having a compass that everyone has together, that if they're marching be the same drum, you can evolve and iterate on the product based on whatever comes your way, whether it's, a pandemic or new capabilities, technology. You've got to be able to adjust and pivot on the fly, because gone are the days where you can just waterfall, the plan and just keep like trucking along. Like the world is not an assembly line anymore, right? Industrial revolution days are done, and people have to really understand, like you can't forecast this stuff. Like who knows what's going to happen 12 months from now, let alone six weeks from now, right? Stuff could blow up. We have a looming election in front of us in the US. You've got all kinds of uncertainty. The global economy is in weird predicament, right? And so people get really stressed out about that. But again, if you have a compass to guide everyone, and to have that shared why, shared North Star, shared guiding principles and core values, you have a culture of that, you're going to be able to move, groove wherever you need to. It's my opinion, at least.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I love that metaphor. And I think that really, that's an analogy for the whole directional, not perfectional, right? The map is perfect because it tells you exactly where to go. The compass is directional. Head this way, be robust, come up with ways to be robust to the change. And if you're true to who you are, and true to what you believe in, as connected to your consumer, that's my yes and to that. It is essential to have a shared corporate value system, right? That's rooted in a common why that's shared. That why needs to be derivative of what is motivating your consumer, right? And when you lose that, you've got a great corporate environment and corporate ethos, but what's it in service of? So making sure that we're reconnecting with those consumers to say, yeah, we do this. We believe that our members are our mission, for example, is rooted in what we believe in relative to those members. Like those members are out there doing X, Y, Z. We need to deliver for them. Therefore, everything that we do is in support of that. And so that's how we set up our organization. That's how we evaluate our products. That's how we set up our policies. It's all in service of making it easier for us to deliver for them, because that's where our shared ethos really lies.
Yeah. So I have a bonus question. I mentioned AI, and obviously AI is kind of consuming everything right now. I'm curious to hear your thoughts and perspectives on using AI, leveraging AI to better understand your users, your customers. I think there's some interesting things happening right now where people are creating synthetic data. They're using the synthetic data to like forecast or predict, what may come, what may happen. And a lot of people like us get up in arms over those ideas. Like, well, it's not the real customer. Like, how dare you, right? This is AI, blah, blah, blah. In addition, AI is taking a lot of the research, analysis, synthesis, a lot of the research related tasks and making them a whole lot easier. There's a tool called Perplexity that I think is maybe number one or two most used tools there right now. And it's essentially a research tool. There's a tool called Dovetail, and they've got AI. There's Otter.ai, which is a really great, there's a lot of tools like it, but a great tool that you can use to record conversations, quickly summarize into insights, actions, outcomes, etc. So anyways, it was a long question, but essentially just curious to hear your perspective on how AI is coming about, the ethics of using it, when the right places and times are to use it, things like that.
I think like anything else, and like any other tool or framework, it can be really useful when used well and in the right places, but we can't surrender to it the same way we can't surrender to the Agile model or even the human-centered design model or like the double diamond model, right? Like it's as good as it's being applied, and it's as good as it's being checked, right? Like it's actually delivering what we need it to do. We're not just blindly hitting play and letting it run rampant. I think, and this is all speculative, I think the advantage of AI is in some of those more kind of mundane tasks. Like I think that's where it's really going to shine in general, but specifically in our line of business of doing some of that pattern processing and looking for those, doing a lot of the analysis from the user research and consumer research that we conduct to help us get to the part where the human brain is really has the advantage, which is looking for those connections with the feeling. That's the part that I think that I don't know that AI will ever get there. And if it does, I'm terrified. If it can start to feel the way that we can feel, because that's the X factor that makes all of this work, right? Is that we can try our best to datafy everything that we know about people and why they're doing what they're doing and what behaviors are indicative of what threads and trends and all those other things. But at the end of the day, it's the reason why it works and the reason why we're able to do this and why human-centered design has really established itself is because it takes into account that feeling that we all as humans share in some way, shape, or form that is a lot harder to digitize. And so as long as we're staying true to that and we're figuring out how to make that engagement better with tools and AI and whatever else the next thing is that comes down the pike, let's do it. But let's be careful that we're not letting that replace the human connection that is really the thing that is going to makes it all even worth it. Really.
Agreed. Can't agree more. I think about it as like a lot of these tools can help you be more effective at the work. For example, this last week I did a multi-day workshop with a client and did it like in person. So we had stickies on the walls and whiteboards and all this kind of stuff. This is probably the third or fourth one I've done in the last 60 days. And it's crazy to me how much faster and easier it is to just simply digitizing all the information that's up on the walls, right? Before I have to sit there and manually type all this stuff out, and you're checking handwriting and you can't really read what it says, and then you're like having to find the sticky in your pile and look back at it and trying to interpret like, what did this say? And now it's the handwriting recognition is like better than I am. The digitizing process takes minutes, not hours, and enables me to focus on the nuance and the more valuable things, which are, so what? Like, what's the point? And how do I help this group of people move and, march together? It's what are the cultural nuances that are creating conflict or pain or friction? And that, to your point, at least right now, isn't capable of doing that. It's not able to discern the things that are unspoken, unsaid, the stuff that's in the middle. And I think that people who are leveraging it are going to be that much more effective. And there's this great quote, and I mean, I'm not the first one to say it, but it's AI won't take your job. People using AI will take your job. I think that, it's going to be really important as we go forward that people are going to have to get comfortable with using tools that they're able to, instead of spending 6 hours digitizing sticky notes, they're spending those 6 hours on figuring out the so what and the why right behind it. Yeah, totally agree with you. I think it's a tool, and like any tool, you have to know how to apply it and when to use it versus it being kind of a fix-all or cure-all problem. Especially in the product world, I think a lot of companies right now are just trying to like stick the 2 letters behind their product and increase their multiples and make more money. And you're like, bubble will burst, just like .com, right? Like it's not the solution. You've got to actually still create a valuable product that people need and want, and because it's got some extra boost of AI love or power behind it, I mean, it's solving a problem,
Yeah, the parallel is like everybody comes to you wanting an app. Like, we need an app. Do you though? Like, what problem are you trying to solve? And is the app going to help or hinder that? Don't just, like, the app is the old AI, right?
It's funny, like last role, this employer, I would interview folks. One of the things that I would tell them is I was like, we're going to look for ways to delete websites and apps, not necessarily build them, right? Because boy, there's like there's an app for that, or I need a website. You're like, do you? Like, I'm not sure. Like if this is the problem you're trying to solve for, I'm not sure that the immediate answer is thing. Unfortunately, never got to delete a website because people are pretty in love with their digital stuff. But yeah, still looking for that opportunity to like tell somebody, hey, you should just delete it. Like, you don't need it. Conor, super appreciate you being on the show and having the conversation. Where can people find you online?
We're at liftcollective.com and then LinkedIn, and we're actually in the process of ramping up our own communication system, if you will. So trying to get some more of these stories out there to the people. But I really appreciate you having me on. This is great. The level of conversation that we're having, I think, is essential, and the democratization of this mindset and the approaches that we're talking about here, I think, are essential for the true progress that we are trying to make as a larger society, right? Like, the more that we can not get caught up in the weeds of the check boxes, and the more that we can, to your point, use our brains and think about how we're impacting each other as a human collective, that's where the progress is really going to be made.
Yeah, great to have you on the show. For folks listening, find me, drewburdick.com. I have a weekly newsletter where I talk about topics like this, as well as the podcast. And you can find me on pretty much any social channel, Drew H. Burdick. Conor, thanks again for being on the show, man. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Right on. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.